The distress signal was weak and broken, barely more than static against the endless silence of Deep Space Commander Elias Vance sat alone in the cockpit of his salvage vessel, the Dusty Horizon, watching the signal blink on his console like a dying heartbeat. He had been working the dead zones beyond the Terran frontier for 7 years now, picking through the wreckage of forgotten ships and abandoned stations. Most signals out here meant nothing, old beacons left running on empty hulks, automated systems crying out to nobody. But something about this one felt different. He leaned forward and adjusted the frequency, trying to clean up the transmission through the static. He heard something that made his blood run cold, a voice, faint and weak, speaking words he could not understand, but unmistakably alive. Elias pulled up the navigation charts and traced the signal to a drifting vessel approximately 2 hours away. The ship did not match any design in his database. It was elegant and curved, built from materials that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light of distant stars. Definitely not human. Protocol said he should report the signal and wait for official response. Protocol said unknown alien vessels were dangerous and unpredictable. Protocol said a lot of things that Elias had stopped caring about years ago. He fired up the engines and set course for the wreckage. When he finally reached the alien ship, he could see the damage clearly. Something had torn through the hull with brutal efficiency. Weapons fire, probably from raiders who prowled these empty spaces looking for easy targets. The vessel was venting atmosphere and spinning slowly, caught in a gentle rotation that would carry it into the void forever. Elias guided the Dusty Horizon alongside and extended the docking clamps. The connection was rough and imperfect, but it held. He grabbed his emergency kit and a portable oxygen supply, then cycled through the airlock into the wounded ship. The interior was dark and cold, lit only by the faint glow of failing emergency lights. The architecture was strange and beautiful, all flowing curves and crystalline surfaces that caught the light in unexpected ways. He followed the distress signal deeper into the vessel, stepping over debris and ducking under collapsed panels, and then he found her. She lay in what must have been the command center, sprawled across the floor like a fallen star. Elias stopped and stared, unable to move for a long moment. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin was pale silver, almost translucent, and beneath it he could see faint patterns of light bioluminescence. He realized, built into her very biology, but the light was dim, barely visible, flickering like a candle in a storm. Her features were elegant and sharp, with high cheekbones and large eyes closed in unconsciousness. Long hair, the color of moonlight, spread around her head like a halo. She was beautiful in a way that felt ancient and otherworldly, like something from a dream or a myth, and she was dying. Elias rushed to her side and pressed his fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. Her skin was cold, far colder than any human should be, but he felt something beating beneath the surface, slow and weak. He had no idea what species she was or how her biology worked. He had no medical training beyond basic first aid. He had nothing but stubbornness and refusal to let someone die in front of him. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was, and carried her back through the damaged corridors to his ship. Every step felt like it took too long. Every second that passed made her glow fade a little more. By the time he got her into the Dusty Horizon and sealed the airlock, her bioluminescence had nearly vanished entirely. She looked like a statue carved from gray stone. All the light drained out of her. Elias laid her on the medical cot in his small cargo bay and stood over her, breathing hard. Trying to think, he pulled up his ship's database and searched frantically through xenobiology files. Most of it was useless basic information about common species, nothing about whoever she was. But then he found a fragment, a half-remembered documentary he had downloaded years ago during a boring transit. Valenthi. The words surfaced in his memory like a fish breaking water, a reclusive species from a distant sector. rarely seen by humans. Known for their bioluminescent biology and their complex social structures, the documentary had mentioned that their glow was connected to their life force when a Volante approached death. They called it the fading. Their light simply went out. Elias looked at the woman on his cot, at the darkness spreading through her silver skin, and felt fear grip his heart. He did not know how to save her, but he knew he had to try. He started with Heather's skin was so cold that it hurt to touch. So he cranked up the environmental controls and wrapped her in every thermal blanket he had. Then he remembered something else from the documentary. Volante biology responded to specific wavelengths of light. He did not know which wavelengths or how to produce them, so he tried everything. Rigged up emergency lights and adjusted their spectrums. He positioned them around her like she was a plant he was trying to grow. Monitored her constantly, watching for any change, any sign that something was working. Hours passed, then more hours. Elias did not sleep. He could not sleep. Not while she was balanced on the edge of death. He talked to her even though she could not hear him, telling her about his ship and his life and the stars outside the viewport. Held her hand because it seemed like the right thing to do. Even though her fingers were cold as ice, somewhere around the 40-hour mark, he noticed the first flicker, a tiny pulse of light beneath her skin. So faint, he thought he had imagined it, but then it came again and again, stronger each time. Elias adjusted the lights and kept talking, kept holding her hand, kept refusing to give up. By the 72nd hour, he was running on nothing but caffeine and determination. His eyes burned and his hand shook, and his thoughts had gone fuzzy around the little edges, but she was glowing again. Soft silver light pulsed through her body like a second heartbeat, growing brighter and steadier with each passing minute. And then her eyes opened. They were silver too, large and luminous, catching the light like mirrors. She looked up at him with an expression he could not read, confusion and fear and something else. Something deeper. Her lips moved, forming words in a language he did not know. His translator implant caught up a moment later, converting the sounds into meaning. "You have claimed me," she whispered. Elias blinked, exhausted and confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, but she had already slipped back into unconsciousness, her glow stable now, her breathing steady. Elias sat back in his chair and stared at her, wondering what he had gotten himself into. He had saved her life. That much was certain, but her words echoed in his mind, strange and heavy with meaning he did not understand. "You have claimed me." What did that mean? He would find out soon enough, but for now, he simply sat beside her and watched her glow, grateful that she was alive, too tired to worry about anything else. Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and distant, indifferent to the small miracle that had just occurred in this tiny ship. A human had pulled a stranger back from death, and nothing would ever be the same again. Volante Prime was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. The planet hung in space like a jewel, swirling with deep purples and silvers, orbiting a star that burned with a cool blue light. As the ship descended through the atmosphere, Elias pressed his face to the viewport like a child seeing snow for the first time. Surface was covered in crystalline spires that rose toward the sky, catching the starlight and scattering it into rainbows. The cities were not built so much as grown, organic structures that flowed and curved in ways that defied human architecture. And everywhere, there was light. The Volante themselves glowed softly in the perpetual twilight, millions of them moving through the streets and towers, their bioluminescence creating a living constellation across the planet's surface. "This is incredible." Elias breathed beside him. Sarava smiled, a small expression he had learned to recognize over the past 2 weeks. "I suppose it is," she said. "I have never thought about it. This is simply home." They landed at a private port on the outskirts of the capital city, where a delegation was waiting to receive them. Elias stepped off the ship and immediately felt every eye turned toward him. He was the first human most of these Volanthi had ever seen. He was loud where they were quiet, warm where they were cool, solid where they seemed almost ethereal. He stuck out like a bonfire in a field of candles. A tall Volanthi male stepped forward, his glow brighter and more controlled than the others. His features were sharp and aristocratic, and his silver eyes held the weight of authority. "Father," Serevith said, bowing her head respectfully. High Arbiter Kalaneth looked at his daughter, then at Elias, and his expression shifted through several emotions Elias could not identify. "You are alive," the High Arbiter said to Serevith. "When we received word of the attack on your ship, we feared the worst. I would have died if not for this human," Serevith replied. "He pulled me back from the fating." The delegation stirred, murmurs rippling through the gathered Valantith. High Arbiter's eyes fixed on Elias with an intensity that made him want to take a step backward. "Telvarin," the High Arbiter said, the word carrying weight and meaning. "With a human." "Yes, Father." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the High Arbiter turned and gestured for them to follow. "We have much to discuss," he said. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings and ceremonies and political maneuvering that made Elias's head spin. He was housed in guest quarters that were beautiful but cold, given clothes that did not fit quite right, and paraded before various officials who looked at him like he was particularly interesting. And Sexarov did her best to guide him through the complexities of Volanthi society, but there was only so much she could explain. The rules were intricate and layered, built up over thousands of years of tradition. Every gesture meant something. Every word carried implications, and Elias kept accidentally offending people without knowing how. The real trouble came when Consul Vathos entered the picture. Vathos was a political rival of the High Arbiter, a smooth-voiced schemer who had been looking for an opportunity to strike at the Kalaneth family for years. The Telvarin with a human was exactly the weapon he needed. "I challenge the validity of this bond," Vathos declared before the assembled court, his glow pulsing with barely contained satisfaction. "The Telvarin is a sacred connection between souls. That this creature has no soul. Humans are merely clever animals, biological machines without spiritual substance." The court erupted in argument. Some defended the bond, others supported Vathos, and Elias stood in the middle of it all, feeling very small and very far from home. "If the bond is invalid, then Serevith Kalaneth must be declared unmarked," Vathos continued. "She will be stripped of her position, and her family will bear the shame of her incomplete state." Elias looked at Serevith and saw fear in her silver eyes, real fear, the kind that went beyond politics and touched something deeper. He stepped forward before he could think better of it. "What do I have to do?" he asked. The court fell silent. Vathos turned to look at him, surprise flickering across his luminous features. "What do you mean? Human? You say I do not have a soul," Elias said. "Fine, prove it. Give me a test. Let me show you that I am more than just a clever animal." The court stirred with interest. Even Vathos seemed intrigued by the challenge. "There is the Vault of Echoes," someone suggested from the crowd. A ripple of unease passed through the assembled. Velanthizarev grabbed Elias's arm. "No," she whispered urgently. "The vault is dangerous. It forces you to confront your deepest memories and fears. Volanthi have been broken by what they found inside, and no human has ever entered. What happens if I pass?" Elias asked. "Then your spiritual legitimacy would be beyond question," the High Arbiter said slowly. "Even Vathos could not argue with the judgment of the vault. And if I fail, you die," Serevith said. "Or worse, you emerge shattered, unable to function. Please do not do this." Elias looked at her, at this woman who had become something like a friend over the past weeks, at the fear and concern written across her glowing features. Thought about walking away. He thought about letting the Volanthi sort out their own problems, but then he remembered Serevith lying on the floor of her ruined ship, her light fading to nothing, and how he had refused to let her go. He was not going to stop refusing now. "I will do it," he said. The Vault of Echoes was located deep beneath the capital city. Carved into the living crystal of the planet itself, Elias descended alone, following a narrow stairway that spiraled down into darkness. The air grew colder as he went, and the walls seemed to pulse with a faint inner light at the bottom. He found the chamber unlike anything he had seen before. The walls were covered in patterns that moved and shifted, creating shapes that almost formed images before dissolving back into abstraction. In the center of the room stood a simple arch made of pure white crystal. The Vault. Elias took a deep breath and stepped through reality shattered. He was no longer in the chamber. He was standing in a small apartment on Earth, watching a woman pack her bags while tears streamed down her face. His wife, his ex-wife, the marriage that had fallen apart because he was never home, always chasing the next job, the next salvage, the next excuse to stay away from a life that felt too small for him. "You never really tried," she said, and her words cut deeper than any weapon. He watched her leave, felt the emptiness of the apartment close around him like a fist. Then the scene shifted. He was on a colony world, standing in the ruins of a settlement that had been destroyed by raiders. Bodies lay in the streets, men, women, children, and he had arrived too late to save any of them. He walked among the dead and counted the graves he would have to dig. 27. Remembered every face. Then the scene shifted again. He was floating in space, his suit running out of air, watching his ship drift away after an accident that should have killed him. He remembered the terror of those long minutes, certain that he was going to die alone in the cold dark between stars. He remembered being saved at the last moment by a passing freighter, and the strange guilt that came afterwards. Survivor's guilt, the feeling that he had cheated death and did not deserve to keep living. The Vault showed him all of it, every failure, every loss, every moment of weakness and fear and doubt. It showed him how small he was in the vastness of the universe, how brief his life would be compared to species that lived for centuries, how little he truly mattered in the grand scheme of things. And Elias accepted all of it. Yes, he thought, I am small. Yes, I have failed. Yes, I am afraid, but I'm still here. He walked forward through the visions, not fighting them, not denying them, simply acknowledging them as part of who he was. The Vault pushed harder, showing him darker memories, deeper fears. He saw himself dying alone, forgotten, unmourned. He saw everything he had ever built crumbling to dust. He saw the heat death of the universe, the final darkness that would eventually claim everything. And still he walked, because that was what humans did. They knew they were mortal. They knew the universe was vast and uncaring, and they chose to love anyway. They chose to hope anyway. They chose to keep going anyway. The visions faded. Elias found himself standing in the crystal chamber once more, the arch of the vault behind him. He was shaking and covered in sweat, and tears were streaming down his face. But he was whole. He was alive. He climbed the stairs on unsteady legs and emerged into the court above the assembled. Valanthi stared at him in stunned silence, and then he realized why. The walls of the chamber were glowing with echoes of what he had experienced inside his memories. His fears, his entire soul lay bare for everyone to see. They had witnessed everything. They had seen a creature that knew it would die, knew it was small and insignificant, knew the universe would forget it, and they had seen that creature choose to care anyway, choose to save a stranger, choose to love, despite the certainty of loss. Consul Vathos stepped backward, his glow flickering with something that might have been shame. "I withdraw my challenge," he said quietly. The High Arbiter looked at Elias with new respect in his ancient eyes. "The Vault has judged," he announced to the court. "This human possesses a soul as true and deep as any Valanthi." The Telvaran stands. Saravath rushed forward and caught Elias as his knees buckled. "You fool," she whispered, holding him tight. "You brave, stubborn fool," Elias laughed weakly. "Told you I would pass," he said, and for the first time since he had arrived on Volanthid Prime, he felt like maybe everything would be okay. Saravath Kalaneth woke to warmth and light and the steady hum of an unfamiliar engine. For a moment she did not know where she was or what had happened. Then the memories came flooding back, the attack on her ship, the raiders tearing through the hull, the cold spreading through her body as she lay dying on the floor of her command center. She remembered the fading beginning, the light draining from her skin, the peaceful darkness reaching up to claim her. But she had not died. Someone had pulled her back. She sat up slowly, her body weak but stable, and looked around the small cargo bay. The space was cluttered and practical. Nothing like the elegant chambers of her homeworld tools. Hung on the walls and crates were stacked in corners, and everything smelled of metal and recycled air. And there, slumped in a chair beside her cot, was the creature who had saved Hira Humansarev. Had never seen one in person before she knew of them. Of course, the young species that had burst onto the galactic stage barely 2 centuries ago. Spreading across the stars with reckless enthusiasm, her people considered them primitive and short-lived, barely worth noticing. Yet here one was, sleeping beside her, dark circles under his eyes and stubble on his jaw. Looking utterly exhausted, she studied him carefully. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with brown skin and black hair cut short. His face was rough and weathered, marked by years of hard work in harsh environments, not beautiful by Volanthe standards. But there was something compelling about him, a solidity, a presence that demanded attention. She reached out and touched his hand. Curious about the warmth of his skin, he jerked awake instantly, eyes wide and alert. "You are awake," Saravath said, her translator converting her words into his language. "Yeah," he said, rubbing his face and straightening in his chair. "I guess I dozed off. Sorry about that. I've been up for a while." "How long?" "About 3 days," he admitted. "Give or take." Saravath stared at him. 3 days without sleep, watching over a stranger he had never met. Why would anyone do such a thing? "You saved my life," she said slowly, testing the weight of the words. "I found your ship, and you were dying," he said simply. "What else was I supposed to do?" "You could have left me," she said. "You could have taken what was valuable from my vessel and departed. No one would have known." He frowned at her, like she had said something strange. "That is not really how I operate." He said Saravath did not know how to respond to that. Among her people, every action had a reason. Every choice was calculated against potential gain or loss. The idea of saving someone simply because they needed saving was difficult to comprehend. But she had more pressing concerns. "Do you know what you have done?" she asked him. "Kept you alive, I hope," he said with a tired smile. "Yes," she said. "But there is more to it than that. Among my people there is a bond called Telverin. It is formed when someone pulls another back from the fading." She paused, watching his face carefully. "To touch someone at the threshold of death is to touch their soul," she continued. "It creates a connection that cannot be broken. And the only way to honor such a debt is through union." He blinked at her. "Union," he repeated slowly. "Marriage," she clarified. For a long moment he simply stared at her. Then he laughed. It was a strange sound, rough and sudden, and Saravath did not know how to interpret it. "You are joking," he said. "I am not," she replied. His laughter died. "Wait. You are serious," he said. "You are telling me that because I saved your life, we have to get married?" "That is correct." He stood up and paced across the small space, running his hands through his hair. "Okay, look. I appreciate that your culture has traditions and everything. But I'm just a salvage operator," he said. "I am not looking to get married to anyone. Especially not someone I met 3 days ago while she was unconscious." "I understand your reluctance," Saravath said, keeping her voice calm even though her heart was racing. "I am equally uncomfortable with this situation. Please believe me when I say that this was not my intention." "Then we just do not do it," he said. We shake hands, go our separate ways, and pretend this never happened. It is not that simple. She rose from the cot, unsteady but determined. If I refuse to tell Varen, I'd bring catastrophic dishonor to my family, she explained. My father is a high arbiter, one of the most powerful political figures on my world. His enemies would use my shame to destroy him. That seems like a your people problem. Not a Emmy problem, Elias said. It is also a matter of spiritual completeness, she continued. A Volanthi who refuses Telvarin is considered incomplete, damaged. They cannot hold positions of authority or enter into other bonds. It is essentially a social death sentence. He stopped pacing and looked at her. So if you do not marry me, your life is ruined. Yes, and if you do marry me, you are stuck with some random human you do not know. Also yes, he sat down heavily on a crate and put his head in his hands. This is insane, he muttered. Seraph could not disagree. There may be a solution, she said carefully. If you accompany me to my homeworld and participate in a ceremonial betrothal, we can search for a loophole afterward. Surely there is some exception in all laws. Some way to dissolve the bond once the formal requirements have been met. He looked up at her. You want me to travel to an alien planet and pretend to be your fiancé? I am asking you to help me navigate an impossible situation that neither of us chose, she said. You saved my life, and I am grateful for that. But I will not force you into anything if you truly wish to leave. I will not stop you. She meant it, despite everything. Despite the ruin that awaited her, she would not trap him. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the floor. Then he sighed. How far is your homeworld? Approximately 2 weeks at standard transit speed. 2 weeks, he repeated. 2 weeks of traveling with someone I just met, to a planet I have never heard of, to participate in an alien wedding ceremony I do not understand. That is an accurate summary. He laughed again, but this time it sounded more tired than amused. Fine, he said. Fine, I will do it. But only because I am not going to destroy your life after just saving it. That would be a waste of effort. Saravas felt relief flood through her, so powerful it almost made her dizzy. Thank you, she said. I do not know how to repay this kindness. How about you start by telling me your name, he said. I have been calling you the alien lady in my head for 3 days. I am Saravath Keleneth, she said. Elias Vance, he replied. Nice to meet you. I guess, and so began the strangest journey of both their lives. The 2 weeks that followed were awkward and uncomfortable in ways neither of them had anticipated. Sarav was proud and formal. Trained from childhood in the art of diplomacy and social maneuvering, she did not know how to interact with someone who had no interest in status or protocolis, was practical and irreverent. More comfortable with machines than people, he kept offering her food from his supplies, not understanding that human ration bars contained compounds that were mildly toxic to her biology. Yet, despite everything, something began to shift between them late one night. When the ship was quiet and the stars streamed past the viewport, Saravath found herself sitting in the cockpit beside Elias. Why did you save me? She asked suddenly. He glanced at her, surprised by the question. I told you, he said. You were dying. I was there, but that is not a reason, she pressed. There was no profit in it, no advantage to gain. You risked your life and exhausted yourself for a stranger. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. I do not know how to explain it. He finally said, where I come from, you just help people when they need it. You do not think about what you are going to get out of it. You just do it because it is the right thing to do. Saravath turned his words over in her mind. Her people calculated everything, debts and obligations and social mathematics. Every interaction was a transaction. Every favor created an expectation. The idea of helping someone simply because they needed help, with no thought of return, was almost incomprehensible. But looking at Elias, at this strange human who had spent 3 days refusing to let her die. She began to understand perhaps there were things in the universe that could not be calculated. Perhaps some choices were simply made from the heart. She did not say any of this out loud, but as the stars swept past and the ship carried them toward her homeworld, Saravath found herself looking at Elias Vance with new eyes. He was not what she had expected. He was not what anyone would have expected. She was beginning to think that might be exactly what she needed. The days following the trial in the Vault of Echoes were strange and quiet. Elias had been given better quarters now, rooms that were warm and comfortable, designed to accommodate his human biology. Valanthi looked at him differently as he walked through the crystalline corridors before. They had seen him as a curiosity at best, an embarrassment at worst. Now they looked at him with something approaching respect, or perhaps fear. It was hard to tell. With Valanthisarith visited him often, helping him prepare for the betrothal ceremony that was rapidly approaching. She taught him the words he would need to speak, the gestures he would need to make, the 1,000 small rituals that made up a Valanthi wedding. But something was different between them now. Elias could feel it in the silences that stretched too long, in the way she avoided his eyes when they talked about the future. He did not push her. He had learned that Saravath needed time to process things, that her mind worked in careful circles rather than straight lines. So he waited one evening, as the blue sun set over the crystal spires and the sky turned deep purple. Saravath came to him with a proposal. "Walk with me," she said. "There is something I want to show you." They left the palace complex and entered a garden unlike anything Elias had ever imagined. The plants were made of crystal, growing in impossible shapes that caught the starlight and scattered it into cascading rainbows. Flowers bloomed with inner light, opening and closing in slow rhythms that matched some cosmic heartbeat. Night blooming crystals, Saravath called them. They only opened when the stars came out. Elias walked among them in silent wonder, feeling like he had stepped into a dream. "This was my mother's favorite place," Saravath said quietly. "She died when I was young, but I remember her bringing me here, telling me stories about the old times." "I am sorry," Elias said. "About your mother." Saravath shook her head slightly. "It was long ago, and she lived a full life by our standards, but I still miss her sometimes, especially now." They stopped beside a fountain where a liquid light flowed instead of water, pooling in basins that glowed with soft silver radiance. "I have been thinking," Saravath said, and there was something in her voice that made Elias pay attention. "About the Telvaran, about you, about everything. I'm one of you," concluded. She turned to face him, her glow pulsing with emotion she usually kept hidden. "You saved my life because it was the right thing to do," she said. "You asked for nothing in return, expected nothing. You simply saw someone dying and chose to help. That is not unusual where I come from," Elias said. "But it is unusual here," Saravath replied. "Among my people, every action has a reason. Every kindness creates a debt. We are bound by webs of obligation that stretch back generations." She paused, her silver eyes searching his face. "The Telvaran is supposed to honor what you did," she continued, "but I have realized that it does not honor you at all. It turns your kindness into a chain. It makes your gift into a transaction." Elias did not know what to say. He had been thinking similar thoughts for weeks, but had not known how to express them. "You saved me because you wanted to," Saravath said, "not because you expected anything. And the Telvaran takes that pure act and corrupts it into obligation." "Saravath, I do not want to marry you because I have to," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. "I do not want you trapped in a bond you never chose. That is not what you deserve. That is not what anyone deserves." Elias felt his heart beating faster. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. Saravath was silent for a long moment. "When I was dying," she finally said, "I saw your face. You were terrified. Not because you were afraid of death, but because you were afraid of losing me, a stranger you had never met." She stepped closer to him, I remember your hands, how warm they were, how you held on to me like you could keep me alive through sheer stubbornness. And I remember waking up to find you asleep beside me, still holding my hand, because even in your exhaustion you refused to let go. Her glow brightened, and Elias realized she was blushing in her alien way. No one has ever held on to me like that. She whispered. No one has ever refused to let me go. Elias reached out and took her hand. Her skin was cool against his, but he had grown used to that. The ceremony is tomorrow, he said. What are you going to do? I am going to invoke the right of speaking, she said. Before the union is finalized, I have the right to address the court, to say whatever I wish. And what will you say? Saraveth smiled a real smile, wide and bright. So unlike her usual controlled expressions, I am going to do something that has not been done in 1,000 years. She said, I am going to invoke Valtherin. Elias raised an eyebrow. I do not know that word. It means the choice freely made, Saraveth explained. It is an ancient rite, older than Tel Varin itself, almost forgotten. Instead of binding through debt, Valtherin binds through mutual choice. Both parties must agree freely, with no obligation compelling them. That sounds complicated. It is, Saraveth admitted, and dangerous if you refuse. Then there is no bond at all, and I will have publicly rejected the Tel Varin. My family's honor will be questioned, Elias frowned. Then why do it? Saraveth squeezed his hand. Because I do not want to own you, she said, and I do not want to be owned. I want to stand beside you as an equal, and that means giving you a real choice. What if I say no? Then you say no, she said simply, and we part as friends, and I deal with whatever consequences follow. Elias studied her face. This strange and beautiful woman, who had turned his life upside down, thought about everything they had been through together. The awkward journey to her homeworld, the political scheming, the trial in the vault, the long conversations in the garden. He thought about her laughter, rare and precious, about the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, about how she had started leaving the lights in his quarters warmer because she knew he preferred it. She had changed for him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. I need you to understand something, Elias said carefully. I'm just a salvage operator. I'm not a diplomat or a politician or anyone important. I have a small ship and a smaller bank account and a history of failed relationships. Saraveth listened without interrupting. I am going to die in maybe another 50 or 60 years. He continued, that is nothing to your people. A blink of an eye. I will grow old while you are still young, and then I will be gone. I know, she said softly. And you still want to give me a choice? Yes. Why? Saraveth lifted her other hand and touched his face, her cool fingers tracing the lines of his jaw. Because in the Vault of Echoes, I saw what you saw, she said. I saw a man who knows he is mortal, who knows his life is brief and the universe is vast, and who chooses to love anyway. Her glow pulsed brighter. I want to be chosen like that. She whispered, I want to be loved by someone who knows the cost and pays it willingly. Elias felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. He had spent years running from connection, from commitment, from anything that might tie him down, but standing here in this garden of crystal and starlight, holding the hand of an alien woman who was offering him something unprecedented, he realized he did not want to run anymore. Okay, he said. Saraveth blinked. Okay? Tomorrow, when you invoke Valtherin, when you give me a real choice. He smiled at her. I am going to say yes. Her glow flared so bright it was almost blinding. You do not have to decide now, she said quickly. You should think about it. Consider the implications. I have thought about it. Elias interrupted. I have been thinking about it for weeks. I was just too stubborn to admit what I wanted. What do you want? He pulled her closer, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. I want to stay, he said simply. Not because I have to, Not because tradition demands it, but because somewhere along the way, I stopped wanting to leave. Saravath laughed that rare, bright sound he had come to treasure. You are a very strange human, she said. And you are a very strange Volanti, he replied. I suppose we deserve each other then. I suppose we do. They stood together in the garden as the night-blooming crystals opened around them, filling the air with soft light and sweet fragrance. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Tomorrow, she would address the court and break 1,000 years of tradition. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, in this moment, they were simply two people who had found something precious in the vast emptiness of space, and neither of them intended to let it go. The great hall of the Volanti High Court was filled with light. Thousands of Volanti had gathered to witness the ceremony, their combined bioluminescence creating a sea of shifting silver and blue crystalline. Pillars rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow, and the walls were carved with patterns that told the history of a civilization spanning millennia. Elias stood at the center of it all, feeling very small and very human. He wore ceremonial robes that had been specially made for him, flowing garments of dark blue fabric that almost fit properly. His heart was pounding so hard, he was certain everyone could hear it. The High Arbiter stood on a raised platform, his ancient eyes watching the proceedings with an expression that revealed nothing. Beside him stood the Council of Elders and the representatives of the great families and Consul Vathos. Of course, lurking at the edge of the gathering like a shadow waiting to strike. But Elias barely noticed any of them. His attention was fixed on the entrance, where Saravath would appear at any moment. A hush fell over the crowd, and then she was Saravath walked into the great hall like a star coming down to earth. Her glow was brighter than Elias had ever seen it. Radiant silver light pulsing beneath her skin, she wore a gown that seemed to be made of woven starlight, flowing around her in waves that caught and scattered. The light, she was beautiful, she was terrifying. She was the woman who had decided to break 1,000 years of tradition for the sake of something she believed in. Elias felt his breath catch in his throat. Saravath walked toward him, her eyes never leaving his face. When she reached the center of the hall, she stopped and turned to face the assembled court. I invoke the right of speaking, she announced, her voice clear and strong. Before this union is finalized, I will address the court. A murmur ran through the crowd. The right of speaking was rarely used, and when it was, it usually preceded some dramatic announcement or political maneuver. Elias watched as the High Arbiter nodded his permission. Speak. Daughter, he said. The court will hear you. Saravath took a deep breath. I stand before you bound by Telvarin, she began. A sacred tradition that has governed our people for thousands of years. This human saved my life, pulled me back from the fading, and by our laws, he has claimed my soul. She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. But I have come to understand something, she continued. Something that took a human to teach me. She turned to look at Elias, and her expression softened. When Elias Vance found me dying, he did not think about what he would gain, she said. He did not calculate the potential benefit or weigh his options. He simply saw someone who needed help. And he helped. He stayed awake for 3 days, fighting to keep me alive, using crude human methods that should not have worked, she said. He held my hand and refused to let go, even when everything suggested it was hopeless. Her voice grew stronger. He did all of this for a stranger, someone he had never met, someone who was not even of his species, and he asked for nothing in return. She faced the court again. And what did we do in response? She asked. We told him that his kindness had created a debt, that his selfless act had bound him to an obligation he never sought. We turned his gift into a chain. The crowd stirred uncomfortably. I am grateful for the Telvarin, Saravath said. I am grateful that it brought us together, but I do not believe that true rescue can create obligation. It can only create possibility. She raised her head high, Therefore, I invoke Valtherin. A gasp ran through the assembly. The elders on the platform exchanged shocked glances even. The High Arbiter looked surprised. Valtherin has not been invoked in over 1,000 years. One of the elders protested. It was abandoned because it was too uncertain, too dangerous. I am aware of the history, Siravath replied calmly. And I am invoking it nonetheless. She turned back to Elias. By the right of Valtherin, I release you from all obligation, she said. The Telvarin is dissolved. You owe me nothing. I owe you nothing. We stand as equals. She extended her hand toward him, and from that equality, I ask not demand. Not require Elias Vance, will you stay? The great hall fell absolutely silent. Every eye was fixed on Elias. Waiting for his response, he could feel the weight of that attention like a physical pressure. Thousands of beings watching to see what this human would do. This was the moment. This was the choice that would determine everything. He thought about his ship, the dusty horizon. Sitting in the landing bay, he thought about the stars and the endless black between them. He thought about all the places he could go, all the salvage he could find, all the freedom he had always valued above everything else. And then he thought about Saravid, thought about her laughter and her courage, thought about the way she had fought for this moment, defying thousands of years of tradition because she believed that choice mattered more than obligation. He thought about cold nights on his ship, when she had stayed up talking with him, and warm days in the crystal garden, when she had shown him the beauty of her world. Thought about how she had started leaving the lights warmer for him. He thought about how she had changed his life without even trying. Elias stepped forward and took her hand. Yeah, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I will stay. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others protested. And Consul Vathos looked like he had swallowed something sour, but Elias did not care about any of that. He was looking at Siravath, at the joy blazing across her features, at the light pulsing through her skin like a second heartbeat. Are you sure? She whispered, and there were tears in her silver eyes. I have never been more sure of anything, he replied. The High Arbiter stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. The Valtherin has been invoked and answered, he announced, his voice carrying across the great hall. Let it be witnessed. This bond is formed not through debt, but through mutual choice, not through tradition, but through something older. He looked at Elias with something that might have been approval. Let it be known that, on this day, a human taught the Volanthi a truth we had forgotten, he continued, that the most sacred bonds are the ones we choose freely, without obligation, without expectation, simply because we want to. The ceremony continued after that. But Elias barely noticed. He spoke the words when prompted and made the gestures when required. But his attention was fixed on Saraith. When it was finally over, and they were declared bonded under Valtherin, the great hall filled with light, not just from the gathered Volanthi, but from something deeper, something that pulsed through the very walls of the crystal chamber. It was as if the planet itself was celebrating in the years that followed. Everything changed. The story of the human who had invoked Valtherin spread across Volanthi Prime, then to neighboring systems. Then across the galaxy, young Volanthi began questioning the old traditions, asking why obligation should matter more than choice. Human Volanthi relations transformed from cautious distance to genuine friendship. Trade flourished. Cultural exchanges began. And a bridge was built between two species that had once been strangers, and it all started with a salvage operator who had stumbled into something precious and refused to let it go. Elias and Siravath built a life together, splitting their time between Volanthi Prime and the stars. Never stopped being a salvage operator. It was in his blood, but now he had a partner who flew beside him, her cool hand in his warm one, her light filling the darkness between the stars. When their first child was born, she was unlike anything either species had ever seen. Half human, half Volanthi. She had her mother's silver eyes, and her father's stubborn jaw. Her skin was warm but luminous, glowing with soft light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Seraph held her up in the light of the blue sun, tears streaming down her radiant face. "What will we name her?" Elias asked, his voice thick with wonder. Seraph's smile got wide, bright smile that he had learned to treasure. "There is a Volante word for freely chosen," she said, "for something precious that was claimed not through debt or obligation, but through pure, uncompelled love." She looked at Elias, at this strange human who had changed everything. "In your language, it means hope." Elias reached out and touched his daughter's tiny hand, marveling at the warmth and light that flowed from her skin. "Hope," he repeated. "I like that." Outside the viewport of their ship, the stars burned cold and distant, just as they had on the night when everything began. But Elias no longer found them lonely. The universe was vast and uncaring, full of darkness and danger and death, but it was also full of possibility. And somewhere in that vastness, two species had found each other, not through conquest or commerce or calculated advantage, but through a simple act of kindness. A human had saved a stranger because it was the right thing to do. In doing so, he had changed the galaxy. That was the power of choice. That was the strength of humanity. That was the story that would be told for generations to come. The story of how love won over obligation. The story of how hope was born. The end.